All right, good morning, folks. Today we're focusing on chapter 16 of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. One of the key themes in chapter 16 has to do with the violence of naming. I know it can be hard to think about giving someone a name as an act of violence, but sometimes naming a person can function similar to how a farmer brands an animal. It can be a sign of property ownership. A name can also be a linguistic and psychic tool for trying to hold someone in place, control them, or categorize them. The sad history of the N-word and other words like the B word, derogatory word for females, or the F word, a derogatory word for people who are homosexual, can function this way as well. This is especially the case if the act of naming is upheld and repeated by a whole community. You can imagine how oppressive the N-word must have been, and in some instances still can be, when multiple people repeat it. If someone hears over and over again what effectively says, "You are less than human," you can imagine that over time it would become easy for that person, especially a child, being called the N-word, to start to identify with the meaning of the word. This is one way that internalized oppression works. To internalize something means to take what is outside and then take it into yourself and hold it inside yourself. Internalized oppression is like a ghostly oppression. It's that sad point where there no longer needs to be an oppressor standing next to an oppressed person, calling them less than human and beating them if they try to resist, because the oppressed person hears and obeys their oppressor even when they are no longer there. It's where the oppressed person starts to believe that they are the dehumanizing name that they are being given. Internalized oppression is what Bob Marley famously refers to when he sings, quote, "Emancipate yourself or free yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." So for Bob Marley and for other people who think in terms of revolution, this idea of having an internal revolution is a necessary step that precedes any external revolution. This idea, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday with the Sylvia Plath poem Cut, this idea that, in that poem, a cut to the thumb can send pain up to the head that can then be a thrill, right? She associates this kind of attack on the head that throws her out of her normal routine of just cutting onions. She associates this attack on the head of the Native Americans, scalping the Pilgrims, or the sort of, a sort of attack against the Ku Klux Klan. This idea that the king, the oppressive king, lives in the head here and lives in the world outside. So you liberate yourself, emancipate yourself from mental slavery is about this internalized oppression. Names and naming, however, can also have the opposite effect. It's not uncommon that when someone undergoes a change, they also change their name to mark their rebirth. One of the most famous instances of this is in the Bible when Saul converts to Christianity and then changes his name to Paul. Another famous example of this, which I'm sure you're discussing or will discuss with Lahas, is when Malcolm Little changes his name to Malcolm X. His name change was a way for him to liberate himself from the name given to his family by slave owners. By renaming himself, Malcolm X took control over himself and his own pathway in life, effectively saying, I will not be the mere effect of the horrible history my ancestors endured. I will break the chain of oppression and chart my own course. An example of positive name change does come up in I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings when Marguerite is given the name Maya by her brother. Even though the name Maya, as I'm sure you'll recall reading, comes from, when Bailey says my sister, Maya's sister, even though it's kind of a form of possession like this, it's not ownership in a negative sense. It's a kind of claiming that effectively doesn't say you belong to me as much as it says you are special to me. So Maya's sister, it's not quite like the branding of an animal or the kind of property ownership claim that the N-word has. It is a possessive idea, but a more positive idea of possession. So today you guys are going to respond to the following RL 8.4 or cause and effect question. I want you to look between pages 107 and 111 from chapter 16. This is where this character, Maya, goes to work for Mrs. Cullinan, and while she's working for Mrs. Cullinan, you'll see that Mrs. Cullinan refers to Maya as Mary. So look at that section and then answer the following questions. Why does Maya take offense to Mrs. Cullinan referring to her as Mary? First question. And second question, what does Maya do about being called the wrong name? Or in other words, what effect comes about from Mrs. Cullinan referring to Maya as Mary? So you need to use two details for your response. The first detail needs to just support why it is that Maya feels offended. So just break this whole thing down, find evidence. This is why Maya feels offended. Boom. Second detail needs to support what Maya does as a result of being called Mary. So the second detail is just about her action after she is called the wrong name. All right, folks, good luck.